when I'm not getting straight up banned from the r/80s subreddit because my Ladies from the 80s music video wasn't considered 80s enough. I like to answer questions that I get on YouTube about the 80s, so let's get to it. Why the 80s? Yeah, that's a good question, other than I had that vocoder, and that inspired me to make a Ladies from the 80s music video, which I thought was super catchy. So I just said, hey, let's just take the whole week, make it 80s week, because why not promote Ladies from the 80s and other great things about the 80s and take a nostalgia trip. So join me. Who would you rather jam with, Garfield or Elf? It'd have to be Elf. I always thought Garfield was kind of like lame. Very milquetoast Garfield. I don't know if that's a hot take or not. I was always on Team Elf. I was 100% in on Elf at the time. I had multiple Elf dolls as a small child, as I remember, and I can't actually remember anything about Elf other than what he looked and sounded like, but I do remember enjoying it, so I definitely want to jam with him. Did you drink Tang? So I remember hearing about Tang and thinking it was cool and wanting to be all about it. So I tried Tang, and then I didn't like Tang, but it was one of those things where, like, I remember I was probably like in 6th grade, so this is in the 90s at the time, and I was like, yeah, Tang. So I bought a cylinder of powdered Tang, and I instantly didn't like it, but I remember I had to force my way through that entire cylinder of Tang, and that's the last I've ever had Tang. Knight Rider or Airwolf? You know, it's probably the basic answer, but I'm going to say Knight Rider. Always been a huge Hasselhoff fan. I found him backwards after doing some Baywatch research. So yeah, Knight Rider's fantastic. Airwolf is something I didn't really even learn about until the 2000s, but I feel like in the moment I probably would have been more into Airwolf, but just because of how culture dictates a lot of your tastes, I am more into Knight Rider, but Airwolf seems kind of slept on. Fave 80s movie. I think this one's kind of easy. A lot of great movies in the 80s, actually. I think the movies were better than the music in the 80s, which I'll get to in a second, but Return of the Jedi has to be the best movie of the 80s, hands down. Bon Jovi or U2? I'm interested to hear the community's take on this one. I'm 100% U2, like without question. I enjoy Bon Jovi, but I mostly enjoy Bon Jovi ironically, and I almost think that so much of Bon Jovi is just Bon Jovi himself, like just like the ultimate charismatic frontman that just kind of almost supersedes the music. And while some people could say that about Bono too, I don't know about that, but I just think U2 has great music, and there's specifically like the 3 main U2 albums that everybody loves, I think are just all-time classics. I don't really feel that way about Bon Jovi, but I do feel like John Bon Jovi himself kind of transcends music, which is an incredibly hard thing to do. So, tip of the cap to John Bon Jovi, but I'm going with U2. Favorite song from the 80s? This was a very eye-opening thing to look into, because the whole thing about, oh, we're going to do 80s week is because, the music was so great in the 80s. And then I did some research about what songs were actually from the 80s, and I was kind of shocked, because I love a lot of songs from the 70s, and a lot of songs from the 90s. I don't really like music from the 80s, is what I learned. What I will say is that the 80s bopped. Like, if you just want, like, a song to bop to, like some dancey, kind of fun music, the 80s is your jam, you know what I'm saying? But as far as, like, just great songs that are, like, really written with incredible heart and songwriting craft, I was actually kind of shocked by how a lot of the stuff I thought was from the 80s was actually from the late 70s. So I was going through, and again, obviously there's exceptions, but just going through all the songs that were technically from the 80s, I guess I'm going to go with Gypsy by Fleetwood Mac. But yeah, it was actually hard to find songs that like I really like just loved in a non-ironic way. Like take for instance Sledgehammer by Peter Gabriel. Great song, incredible song, but there's something kind of like a little cheeky about it. And I think that's the whole thing about 80s music in general, is it's just all very cheeky. But that's why I think stuff like that is remembered better with some nostalgia than it is actually kind of like, oh, let's take this apart. But that's why it was really kind of interesting I'm doing the Hall & Oates video that I posted yesterday about the genius and of Hall & Oates, because those guys were guys that were like just like straight up gifted songwriters, producers, players, whatever. And even though they were huge in the 80s, I think it's funny how I feel like their music has stood the test of time more than like a lot of their contemporaries that may have like been bigger than them. So very interesting, just kind of going through the music of the 80s and just kind of making realizations like that. And anything you guys want to add, please help me out. Because like I was technically alive for some of the 80s, but I don't feel like I had an 80s experience. Best 80s car. This has got to be the Jeep Renegade, a fantastic Jeep if there ever was one. And look how stylish that is. Come on. If you could bring back anything from the 80s to make popular again, what would it be? Probably the Chicago Bears defense. What 80s hair band had the best hair? Motley Crue, Bon Jovi, etc., etc. I'm going to go with Bon Jovi. I think just, like I said, the charismatic nature of prime Bon Jovi is unparalleled in the history of music as like just like a singular force. I can't say it enough. The man just transcended music. I wasn't even around for it, but just kind of seeing like the Live It on a Prayer music video, it's like, who is this guy? It's not fair. Which Garbage Pail Kid best describes your mood right now? I didn't really know the Garbage Pail Kids, but I looked them up, and this one best describes my current mood for sure. Forgive me for misunderstanding, but what exactly makes you the authority to actually title your video as doing it the right way? Then in your video, you dispel that title by saying there's other right ways. I'm really interested in hearing your albums and seeing you at the local amphitheaters, playing your corrected chords and making everyone woo. Or am I incorrect also in misjudging your absolute integrity and talent? Good luck. To which I replied, would you like to speak to the manager? To which she replied, no, you already proved that your smart-ass reply matches your inflated ego and overconfidence. I'll stick to Mel Bay. That's the salty Karen comment of the week. I'll stick to Mel Bay. That's not a way to flex on anyone. You don't sound cool at all saying that. So for listening homework, we're going to go to Gypsy by Fleetwood Mac. I love this song. It's one of my favorite songs of all time. Pop, genre, whatever, it doesn't matter. Gypsy's so good. Fantastic. We play it in kind of all my live shows, albeit a much different version of it. So check that out. Show Fleetwood some love. Because, again, I thought that was more 80s, but it seems like their wheelhouse is more 70s. Well, whatever. Doesn't really matter. Also check out Ladies from the 80s. And there's more Ladies from the 80s content coming soon, whether you like it or not. So hit me up on Instagram, Twitter, or the website, or the comment section if you have any questions. I'll talk to you all soon. Thanks a lot.